Welcome to this panel for the NLP or for Positive Impact workshop. And we have an amazing group of 3 panelists and myself. I'm also going to moderate. So yes, I'm both a panelist and moderator, but mostly I'm just excited to hear from my 3 peers. And let me quickly introduce them. So we have Professor Luz Chiaruzzo. Did I pronounce your name correctly? No? Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, so
yes, that's okay.
That's okay. Yeah. Can you say how you pronounce it?
Yeah, we say Chiruso, so it's okay.
Chiruso? Yeah, okay, just want to make sure I get it right. From Uruguay. And we also have Tara Klopsky, who's the CEO of Technovation. And we have Professor Rada Mihalcia, who also presented just before this panel from the University of Michigan. And myself, I'm an assistant professor at Stanford at the Graduate School of Education. So what I was really hoping is that we can just have an open discussion about different topics around NLP for social good and touch upon perhaps some of our experiences doing research in this area, but also I'm hoping that maybe there will be some interesting discussions that these questions can spark. So perhaps even if there are people disagreeing on a certain topic, or I don't know, I'm hoping that we can have a lively conversation. And obviously these are very, very broad questions about, how to define NLP for social good and what are the goals for the next 10 years, what are the main challenges. So obviously we don't need to answer them all, but I was hoping that, everyone can we can go through them, and then each question can be answered by a couple of panelists. And when you answered maybe the first question that you pick, it would be, I think, really interesting for everyone in the audience to just quickly hear an introduction or summary of work that you do in this area, so that that can serve as a basis of the conversation too. And one thing I forgot to mention is that the panelists here, many of them work in education. So I think that's one of the sort of sub-themes of this panel, is looking at these questions through the lens of education specifically. So we'd love to, understand what are some specific questions, issues that are at this intersection. So maybe we can start with the first question, which is, how do you all define NLP for social good? And you can answer this as broadly as you want, or take education as a specific example. And I'm also personally really interested perhaps in how do you not define NLP for social good? So you can answer it however you like. Any volunteers?
So maybe I can start. Okay, so first of all, thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's a great opportunity. Thank you. So I wanted to mention about the definition of NLP for social good and doing things for social good in general, about a concept we have here in Latin American universities, that is the university extension. I think there is a similar concept in other universities as well, but it means sort of always giving back to society. So it's always trying to define a target community in society that has some problem that they need to solve, and then going with them and work out a solution as a collaboration. So it means there always has to be like a dialogue between the university and this target community in order to build a knowledge together. So that is directly working about social good. I mean, like finding a group in society that has some need, and then work with them towards solving that need. And it's important that there is a dialogue. There is like university tries to solve the problem, but it's not that the university has the solution and tries to apply it. It must be back and forth. We have to go and understand what they want and what they do. And sometimes we find out that what we thought was a solution was not a solution at all, and they had other needs. So in this, I'm going to use the example of this project we have in teaching, it's in building NLP tools to help teaching English in rural schools in Uruguay. So we had all this idea of using NLP tools to help teachers in order to create more better English exercises and English games. And then we went to some rural schools to try it, and we found out that they needed something different, something simpler with our things, because the level of English we were aiming was like too high. So there was an interaction, and after that we understood better the problem. So that's one way of seeing it. I'm not sure if it's the complete definition of NLP for social good, but I think that taking in consideration the society, their needs, and having a dialogue with them, it's essential for this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really great point, and sort of social good is defined by a society that you're trying to impact, and that's like really important, that it's not a top-down thing. So yeah, thank you for that point.
So just to add a little bit to what Luis said, I think it's thinking broadly of the impact that we have on society. And since you mentioned, Dora, how it's not defined, I think just for reasons of completeness, I would bring up a discussion I had with colleagues a few years back when we had an symposium on AI here at Michigan, and the theme was AI for social good. And some of my colleagues didn't necessarily like that name because they saw that talking about AI for social good would imply that there is also some other AI for like social bad. So in a way, and I think to some extent we see a little bit of that happening, like social good being overused as a term, and so being diluted. Like whatever you do, you would, not whatever, but a lot of the things that are being done are called social good. So it's useful to think about what is really and what does it mean to have social implications. In a way, for a lot of the work we do, I could think of the social implications in the long term. But it's one thing to do that. Another is what Luis was talking about, to actually go, say, in the schools, in a rural area. It doesn't have to be rural area, but actually go and talk to the potential users of what you are building, figure out if what you do is indeed what they need, and try to estimate to some extent the social impact. And that to me would be like NLP for social good, where you have this close communication with the experts in those spaces, potential users, to have in a way a validation that that's indeed impacting society in a positive way, as opposed to imagining how it could impact, which is not bad. I think it's good to do research that you would think it might be helpful, but that might be a very broad umbrella of social good, as opposed to the more concrete one.
Yeah, Red, thank you for that. That's I see that. I also know I've heard that critique before about NLP for social good being overused. And yeah, I would say most NLP papers start out with a very socially motivated introduction. But it's as you say, it's different to imagine that in the long term versus doing like participatory research, where really you're involving the community in the design and like the implementation of whatever methods you are developing. So what I think I would love to learn more about is, first of all, how do you go about that? And how do you, I've done some of that kind of research myself. what are some of the challenges that maybe we can sort of skip a few questions, but I would love to return to this question of what are the main achievements in this area. But yeah, like, unless Tara, you would also like to answer this first question, we could move to this other next question of what are the challenges of building this connection with the community that you're trying to impact.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on the panel. I think I have a different view where I feel like it's a condescending view to say this community needs help and we are going to come. And even though there are some stages of saying, oh, we're going to involve you in user design or whatever participatory, I still think that at the end of the day, you are sort of, even though many projects can have a deeper involvement in the community, but the users are typically just users. And they are sort of, their points of view are heard, they're part of focus groups, but you're giving them something. And I think there are some interesting dynamics there. And so Technovation has a very specific viewpoint, which is that we want to actually empower these communities with the tools that are powerful so that they can tackle these problems on their own. Because the root cause of a lot of issues is the lack of skills and the lack of education. And it doesn't take that long to actually build technical capacity in communities. If you think about it, if you scaffold the right curriculum, you could probably build up a very significant baseline of knowledge within 5 years. And I think that's a much better use of funding than to have projects that were started and they languish after the grant is over. And so I think for us, Technovation is a competition. We run in 120 countries. We empower girls to find problems in their communities and to develop either, it used to be mobile apps and now it's AI-based prototypes. And interestingly, so we are limited by the kinds of tools that are accessible to novices. So we rely on others to have wrappers around some of these powerful AI-based platforms. So we use a platform called Machine Learning for Kids. It's very much like a Scratch-based kind of, but it runs on IBM's Watson. And we have a very robust curriculum teaching children how to train models. So really just machine learning. And language is one of the biggest areas that children or girls create apps around, because most of our girls come from low-income countries and they come from communities that don't speak the major languages. And so there's a big desire to either communicate with tourists or to preserve older cultures and traditions and to help. And a lot of the current really cool platforms don't support these languages. So this is something that we've seen for the past 10 years, where one app that was so cool was from a team of little girls, like I think they were 10 years old, from Cambodia. They created an app to inspire children to write poetry because during the genocide, the older generation was lost. And with that, they lost a lot of their poetry. And so these girls were like, okay, we're going to create an app in Khmer to encourage young children to generate their own poetry. So I think like those are the things that we have seen, and there's so much desire. And for us, it is, yeah, we should definitely connect them to the scientists and experts doing this, but the key is to empower them so that they can identify the problems, and then the roles are reversed.
Can I follow up with a question then? With the background that Tara and I go back for many years, so I feel comfortable to answer the points she makes and also challenge her with more questions. I think you're making an excellent point of empowering the communities. And I would be curious to hear what you think in terms of what kind of empowerment. So it's one thing, for instance, to become familiar with NLP tools and be able maybe to develop them yourself. And then there is the other level, which maybe not everybody is ready for or willing to go into, say, the research space, right? So you have a problem, how you even find the solutions, how do you know what was done, and so forth. So at that point, maybe empowerment may take a very long time, and maybe not everyone would be willing to do that. So I'll be curious to hear from you what you think about that. So that's a more limited group of people like researchers is one group, and say NLP programmers is another group. So at which point you can talk about empowering the communities, and which point acknowledging, and I think you make an excellent point, that it can come across as condescending. If you say like, oh, we come here to help you and you are users. But at some point, given that researchers, there are only that many researchers worldwide, there would be that kind of relations where there will be the people who know how to go about solving problems and the people who are maybe users or programmers, but it's still not equal or peers.
Yeah, I also have a follow-up question to Tara actually, which is, I think there's you're talking about like kids, for example, who might not know a lot about machine learning. So I think it seems like there's it's not a binary of, oh, either you help them top down or empower them bottom up, because even if you are empowering them bottom up, you said you're giving them curricula or something that are sort of guiding them in a particular direction. So I think you're still like even for them to know the kind of problems they can tackle or the questions to ask or the vocabulary to ask those questions, is someone has to help them with that. And so I think there is some element of top-down education in that, which you might say, oh, educating them is also like a little bit of
absolutely propaganda or something, right?
Thing.
Yeah, there is an agenda there. Well, no, for sure. And I think, but then you rely on research of like, okay, education is one of the fastest paths out of poverty. It is one of the fastest paths for, and women are just, there's no country in the world that has gender equality. And if we want to progress, we, the big lever that we can pull is actually bringing women into research, into the innovation space, because no country has more than like 30% of women that are in that type of workforce. So I think it makes sense from a country's point of view to actually invest in that. And the way we do that is by empowering and building capacity in the local teachers. So again, like it's all capacity building in the community, and it takes a ton of effort. But even then, if you look at it long term, the dollar invested in that is way better than having a side project where the money actually goes to people outside of the country. And a very small part comes to the users. And without fail, communities come to us and tell us, yes, we were part of this project, yes, but we never felt that that sense of empowerment. And to Radha's question, I think that's a big one that we struggle with, that are we pushing girls into a particular field, and what does success look like for us? And I think it is just a sense of possibility, right? Like where they see AI on their phones, but they never think that they can implement it or they can develop something. And again, a very common thing that little girls, regardless of which country they are from, like even girls in Silicon Valley, say nobody thinks of them as innovators. It's typically a viewpoint that's only sort of afforded to boys. And I think that's just so interesting. So I think just the very fact that somebody believes in you opens up your potential and horizon. And I agree, like there's always room for the experts to actually make the breakthrough progress. But the goal here is to raise the baseline of skills, because break this mode of operating where the community or the users are just coming in as recipients. And I think like in some areas, the problems are so complex that, and I think health is one of them, right? Like where to be a doctor, you need to go through many years of technical training, right? So, and I'm sure like, computer science is the same. So you can't compare somebody who's done a 60-hour program and say, okay, in 5 years, you're going to become an equal contributor. So I think there's a lot of room for design of these multidisciplinary teams where the community or the user is not relegated to just that role. But there's a very intentional part about building capacity long-term in these communities that we are working in. So, but yeah, it's not as if this is the answer. It's work in progress.
Yeah.
If I might add something to that, sorry. So I agree with you, Tara, that it's a very important work what you're doing. You detected an important gap in the education information, and you are working towards it. And the point is, detecting those gaps is also very hard, and it's one of the things. This community of rural kids, for example, are also like underserved and often an neglected community. Also in this project, both the kids and the teachers, none of them know a lot of English. So the kids are just starting, and the teachers also just starting. So finding tools to make their lives better was the main objective. So we didn't find the need. I mean, the local education authorities found the need, and they said, well, here's a need of something we have to do. And detecting the needs where we can provide our knowledge is very important, but also collaborating with the community in order to build the knowledge together is also important. So it's not we have the solution, we have to implement there. It's like it has to go back and forth.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really interesting and productive conversation. So yeah, it sounds like we are sort of segueing into the sort of challenges, because Luis, you highlighted like that just identifying what the gaps are is not trivial. Tara, you highlighted how it's a challenge to like, yeah, how do you really empower those communities to make the change and impact themselves? And I guess what are some of the other challenges that you can think about, and how do you think we can address them, and how can we do so in a way that as Tara pointed out, is not condescending and is really centered around the people who need, who we are trying to empower.
I think just I'll say something. I think to Lewis's point, identifying gaps is very hard. I think that's absolutely right. And just because you experience a problem doesn't mean that you can even detect nuances in the problem, because you'll come up with some, that's why I guess, like, I don't know who said it, but if you ask people for a faster way of locomotion or whatever, they would have come up with a bigger, powerful horse, not a car, right? And so I think that that's something that we've seen, that girls have a very, very, very hard time identifying a feasible problem to work on. And I'm sure researchers identify with this. One of the things that has recently absolutely blown me away has been, we've been playing with OpenAI's playground using GPT-3. And I think it's an example of where the collective knowledge exists, but as the knowledge base increases, it's so hard to access it, to synthesize it. And this is where better tools can be very powerful. And so we may be piloting it this year to actually say, under this big sustainable development goal, here are some focal problems to work on. And maybe you can pick any one of those that resonate with your experience. And then here are some potential strategies that could be viable for innovation, for technology, that also experts have identified. So synthesizing sort of the knowledge base that exists, but putting it in a way that young people can act on. I feel like this is going to be a game changer for us. We have so much data at the moment. We have 10,000 app descriptions, business plans, pitch videos, and I was just putting it into the playground and kind of getting feedback, and it's just very, very interesting. So I feel that that problem identification part is going to get a little easier with better tools out there.
I'd say another, so I know a main focus of this panel is on education, and maybe there is that dynamic where there is somebody who's learning and somebody who knows more. But there are other areas for social good, including probably in education as well, where there is more like peers. So I think it's better illustrated in healthcare, but we can come back then to education, where, for instance, there are medical experts. So they will be my peers in the sense of being people who've been going through med school for many years and studied that. And in that setting, for instance, so that would be a setting for NLP for social good, where you can make a difference in healthcare. But there, we wouldn't talk necessarily about empowerment, because I don't think the medical doctors, for instance, would want to be empowered because they don't have the time to start devoting to NLP and learning how NLP works. So that's a different kind of collaboration or dynamic where they provide the expertise in that space and we provide the expertise in this other space. And while it might come across as NLP is helping them, eventually is what they want. So they run into problems of, for instance, doctor-patient communication or shifts between nurses, which is something I heard recently, and how you communicate that information. It is more like a cross-discipline joint work. And that's another space where I think there is a lot of room for making societal impact. And a challenge there is how to speak the same language, like how to communicate in a way that ends up being rewarding on both sides. So we might end up with what Tara was pointing out earlier, but at a different level, where I don't want anyone to say, come to me and say, well, I need a program, because that would not be satisfying to me as a researcher. And conversely, I can do the same thing where I would see maybe of somebody in psychology as running surveys where really they do more interesting stuff than that. And so finding the right communication channel that's rewarding on both sides seems to be a big challenge there. Now, if we come back to education, again, when it's students versus teachers, it's one dynamic, but I could see also, for instance, teachers with teachers. So for instance, in those rural areas that Luis was pointing to, there are teachers there. So I guess a question would be how you work closely with the teachers who are currently teaching the kids in those areas in a way that would empower them without them necessarily wanting to change careers. So probably they don't want to become NLP researchers, but in a way that's really collaboration that's rewarding on both sides. It's not like they come to us like, oh, I need a tool. Maybe we don't want to build a tool because we are researchers, not programmers. And we don't go to them like, oh, now go and use this and do what I tell you, because that will not be rewarding to them. So that to me is a big challenge, how you find these collaborations that are engaging, and I'm repeating myself, rewarding on both sides.
Yeah, I think that last point you said about teachers asking for an app that does this and that, and then we say, well, we are NLP researchers, we don't want to program an app that does this and that. So there we have to find a middle ground. What happened during these years in the project is that at the beginning, teachers had a lot of these questions. Well, why don't we have an app that does this or whatever? That had nothing to do with NLP, but like it started changing. Like with time, they started to understand what NLP can do for them, and now they ask for more complex things. And I think they're getting the grasp of what NLP can do and how to use it, and that is like a more fertile ground for discussing things, because they now more or less know what to expect. And we tell them, well, the tools are never perfect. You will always find errors and things. So the human interaction is always necessary. So for example, we have a tool for building a crossword or something. You input a text and then it builds a crossword from that text. But of course, it's going to have errors. So the teacher is always needed in order to fix the errors that could be there, and then send it to the kids. And when they see that, they come up with new ideas of new games, new exercises to do, and that's great. It's like they are learning, we are also learning from them, and it's a very nice exchange.
Yeah, that's super cool. That sounds like a fun process. Yeah, I also wanted to add like one more challenge. Like I really appreciate, Rada, your comment about like, you know, finding the right way to talk to each other. I think another challenge that I've experienced is in a lot of cases when we are, you know, deploying something in the real world, we want to understand the actual impact, like the causal impact of, is it actually helping? Because a lot of the times, like in education, for example, a lot of the interventions are not very effective. And and so in order to do that, you kind of have to do something like a randomized trial or something where that I think can be challenging from several reasons. Like the community who you're working with, let's say teachers, might perceive something like a randomized trial as like, oh, I'm a guinea pig or something, and like, you know, I don't want to be part of that, or you know, there might be other challenges, and like just in general, like if you have to like involve parents to give consent, and like it just all becomes this really messy process where in the end it might, like if you're really, you know, doing it based on like everyone is opting into this research, it might be a very self-selective group, and you might not actually be able to understand the true impact of your tool on like the general, you know, teacher population. Like I'm just making up, not making up, drawing on one example from my own research. I'm trying to build NLP tools to give feedback to teachers on how they're building on students' ideas, what kind of questions they're asking to help them improve their practices. And obviously this is not something that I think should ever replace like a human coach or like a teacher coach, or I don't think that every teacher should be using it. I think this ultimately should be an opt-in thing. But in order to understand how it is impacting teachers, we do need to do some sort of like causal analysis, and not just like, oh, I like this tool, it's fun, but like actually what impact it had on teachers' practices in a randomized setting. And I've definitely run into issues just doing it in a way that is completely like, you know, respecting teachers' agency, but also like making sure that the research is sound. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why there might be this sort of worry in community members perhaps about research, is because that we know that there's all these problems about surveillance, and like just a big issue about like, you know, being, it's like this top-down thing that feels like, oh, I'm being the subject of some research, even if it's like participatory. Like how do you ensure that there's trust, and yeah, it takes time to build. And I guess just that's a point about another challenge that I experienced. Yeah, so
I think that's an excellent point. It's very hard, but in a way, the investment you put, like to make such collaborations work, which does require a lot of effort, I think so much bigger is the reward at the end. So it's harder to get started, but eventually there will be more impact, I would say, once you get it to work.
I think my piece of advice there would be that I know, like in academia, there's a real push to publish at a regular pace, and I think sometimes that can really detract from working on bigger problems, because you have to pick your problem very carefully. And if you wanted to tackle a big social problem, guess what? It's going to take you a lot of years to gain understanding and trust. You cannot accelerate that. And so all the challenges you were mentioning, Dora, are just because that you're trying to hasten that process of sort of building trust and respect in that community, and that just takes years. So, and rightly so, right? So I think that there I would say, instead of spreading yourself too thin, you have to really think carefully about what is the social problem that you want to tackle, and build your base of partners and collaborators and understand the language they speak. I mean, I think Radha, that's absolutely right. Like there are experts in all communities, regardless of their income level, but it takes time to try to understand their language. And I've seen too many researchers be in such a hurry because they have either a grant or a paper that they're trying to publish, and they need data now, and I have 6 and whatever, and that just doesn't work that way. So I think the only thought there would be, pick your problem very carefully and then invest, and be ready to invest a lot of time into it, because guess what, you'll make a huge impact. But you cannot fast forward that and say, I have a little idea, and I want to test it in this community. That kind of agile mindset is great, but it needs to be grounded in a bigger vision.
Mm-hmm. I think that's especially true in an area like computer science. I was talking recently with others, even if we don't consider, say, communities, like my example with healthcare in itself, consider the same, like a developed country, sort of same footing, maybe even same university, have very different pace. Like in computer science, we publish on archive sort of every second. So that's like a really like running through things, as opposed to other disciplines sort of take more time. And so that alignment between different speeds sometimes can be very hard. And to your point, Tara, even just acknowledging that it's a different speed and trying to be wary that other places work very differently and take time with that. At times it can be difficult. Like people are in a rush to do things very quickly, and it's motivated by different goals, careers, and peer pressure than others, but it's acknowledging that it's very different in different places. It's very important.
I think the rush is there, just the motivations are different. Like a nonprofit needs to raise money. A for-profit also has like shareholders, they have quarterly reports. So I think the pressure, but I think what I'm trying to say is like, you can have incremental progress, but like big breakthroughs take time, and regardless of which field you are in, and that's just a function of putting in the hard work into one place rather than spreading yourself thin. And yeah, but there are different stages in your career when you're initially exploring, right? You're trying to figure out which is the social problem that makes sense. Maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's education, maybe it's climate, right? So
yeah, thank you. That's like an excellent point. And yeah, I guess just the whole I think any research that involves people is much slower for right reasons than just sitting down and coding something up on your computer and like publishing it. And yeah, so I think that we all probably appreciate that, and I think just it would be great if I think if there was a sub community. I think that that's another challenge that I had. You talk about publishing, just even where to publish the kind of work that is very applied, that is building, that's a combination of social science and NLP, and like the social scientists might perceive it as like might be skeptical to like, oh wow, these methods we don't understand, and then from the NLP side, they don't understand the social questions, or like why that's really important. So what I really struggled with also is like finding the right venue for like an audience that truly cares. I think this group of people in this workshop is excellent. But yeah, it's rare. There are not that many communities. So we have only like 4 minutes to go, and I guess I don't want to like funnel anyone into like answering any of these questions, but I would just love to hear any last thoughts, and or also like perhaps questions from the audience. Stop sharing for the panelists. So if no one has specific questions, I would love to hear just like in a 1 minute answer from each of you, like where do you see this field where do you think this field should get within the next 5 to 10 years? Like what do you think are the most important goals that we should really focus on? And anyone can, yeah. Radha, do you want to start?
Sure. So for once, I don't know that the answer could come from one person. I mean, obviously on this panel, there are multiple people, but in general, since it's a question on NLP for social impact, I think the answer really should come from multiple people, like what really impact for a variety of communities would mean in ways of defining what the next 5-10 years would be. And I think this workshop is the right place for that, as it would be other such conversations. I think it would be great to have also involvement from communities in defining what should be the next 5-10 years. I would say, so that's one point. And then the other, in a recent conversation Tara and I had, she mentioned Earth for All as a book that was like recently published. It's specifically about climate change. But the main idea there is that rather than going for what would be the general beliefs that contribute to climate change, like we will all think of energy and gas emissions, and so that's sort of the common belief, but trying to go for the underlying reasons, like in that case would be, say, inequality or poverty. And I think similarly here, we can, like, starting with what are some of the big social impact problems and try to go under them and understand what are the places where, say, NLP could make a difference. So it's not necessarily like if we think of climate change, I gave that example earlier in my talk, NLP cannot really help with gas emissions, but NLP could help with, say, inequality or with women empowerment or some of the other underlying reasons behind climate change. And the same would be for the other things. So I really like that kind of thinking where you start with what are the big societal problems and then go under for what are the main reasons behind that, like the big impact ways to address that, and then think of where NLP can play a role. And obviously it won't play a role in everything, but that would be something that would be great if we could have it as a community-wide exercise for years to come to figure out those areas.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we are technically out of time, but I'm just wondering, Zhijing, if we have time for like just 2 quick answers from Luis and Tara. Great. Okay. Yeah,
I'll be quick. I think Radha talked about my favorite book at the moment, but I think what specifically empowering women is a very, very powerful strategy. Number 2, I think in that is giving tools to most of the Earth's population that doesn't come from one of the major languages. Even if you come from and speak one of the major languages, there are many different versions of it, different dialects. And I think giving them these powerful tools, or so that their voice is heard and captured, and their cultures, I mean, that's what sort of makes the world unique. So I think the large language models are very, very interesting to think about, but I think a lot of the languages that are not represented, I think need to be thought about, because they're real people who speak those.
Yeah,
yes, I agree with Radha and Tara, and yeah, work in under-resourced languages like indigenous languages, also sign languages, and also varieties of languages that are not so widespread is very important in order to bring more people in and to make these tools available for everyone. Also work in education, and also work in things like hate speech detection and analysis of bias in the NLP tools we have. Those all those are things that are very important and will have a big impact, I think, in the near future.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. I see also a comment. Yeah. Thank you so much for this great panel. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from you all.